Alright, working on the H here again, about to get the engine wrapped up. This is the world's worst design I have ever seen for a rear main seal. I don't know what the idiots were thinking that designed it. It would be something, and when they came out in the later model equipment, you know, they just make this all one piece, it's flat, and they just have a wear sleeve with a lip seal. I don't know what was so hard to do there. Why they had this stupid two-piece felt seal. You got to put this piece on first, bolt it in, and then you put this piece, and there's some little plugs that go in here, and then you put the oil pan up and get all that tightened up, and these are still loose here, and I haven't put the bolts in the bottom yet here. But anyway, you let this little felt, these two felt half pieces soak in oil for a day or so, get all soaked with engine oil. Then you jam them down in this slot here, trim them off a little bit so that they still stick up a little bit so that there's crush, but they're not sticking up like that. And then there's a whole bunch of gaskets you got to put on here, and this is just a bad idea. I mean, it's just horrible. And then this thing naturally doesn't sit down in there because you got to crush that felt wear strip. So then you got to take these bolts. I don't remember which ones are which. There we go, these little short ones. Well, how many do we got of each? Okay, 1, 2, 3. What is it? Okay, these 3 must go. Yeah, it's too tall. These are shorter ones. This top half isn't as bad because you can suck it down tight with these bolts. The other one, on the bottom half, you're just trying to push up, line up the bolts and everything all in one shot. And I've heard these seals are not they're not supposed to be a complete seal. They're made to seat just a little bit too, which I don't know if there's any truth in that. But if it is, that was still a bad idea. Who ever heard of a seal wanting a seal to leak? Let's start. I didn't video it, but man, it was a real pain trying to get that top one to, or get that bottom one in there. And it's going to be a real pain here to get the top one to start. And it's aluminum, so you can't get real crazy on it, tightening stuff down. You gotta be halfway careful, and it's just not good. Careful not to cross thread it and all that other crap. I've done one of these about 3 or 4 years ago, and I don't remember it being this bad, but that's 3 or 4 years ago too. It was also on an H. Another guy in the neighborhood had it. tighten these very tight because they do just have they are just aluminum. And you can see it's dripping oil out of the seal there as it clamps it down. You know what that might... Let's see. I don't know if I got that. Those might have... It's supposed to have long bolts in it. That'd be awfully long, but... Yeah, I better put the long bolts. So anyway, I'll move the bolts around, but you get the idea of what it's supposed to happen there. And then there's a row of bolts that goes in the bottom here too. But that seals it up and hopefully it doesn't leak. Didn't end up moving the bolts because I was out of long bolts. I only had like 3 longer ones, so would have had one that was odd placed anyway. But anyway, I tightened these vertical ones first to clamp it on the crankshaft and get that all centered. Then I tightened these bottom ones here to let it suck it down to the oil pan if it needs to, and then you can go ahead and suck it in this way because it can move that way if it wants to on the crankshaft. But I siliconed everything. That takes a little more time, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to leak because it's such a pain to put in. So, well, I'll clean this up a little bit and then put it back in the frame. Alright, I got the flywheel all torqued up there to 75 foot-pounds and whatnot. Danny Lickler wanted a video installing the clutch and adjusting it. So that's what we're going to do. These clutch discs are directional. Go in like that. That side there. And then this is what they call pot style clutch, because the disc sits inside the flywheel and it's like a pot. This is more of an older style. It seems like the newer ones have a it's just machined flat and then the clutch bolts to the face of it. If you ever machine these or turn the flywheel, you know, if you put a new clutch in it and have the flywheel turned to get a new surface, you have to turn this face, but you also have to turn this face here the same amount so that it sets the so if the clutch disc moves in farther, the pressure plate, which is what this piece is, also moves in farther. Heard of that happening where guys will turn these style clutches and then they won't even hardly pull at all once they put a new clutch in it. It's because they probably didn't turn this face here to set the pressure plate, and it's just not putting enough spring pressure on it to where it can actually pull it. If you have a dual disc clutch, a lot of bigger equipment has a dual disc, which means they have a flywheel, then a clutch disc, and there's like a spacer plate in there that's about that thick, or maybe even a little thicker than that, and then another clutch disc, and then the pressure plate. And for those, you have to use a regular input shaft, a splined input shaft to align the clutch disc. Here, just take the clutch alignment tool and find something that's a pretty big pilot bearing. Find the end that has the same diameter for the pilot bearing. Yep, that fits in there just like that. And then you put that in, that tapered thing slides in there, and you just hold that in there like that, and you can kind of hold up on it just a little bit. It's pretty easy though, because they do taper the splines a little bit on the input shaft there, so it slides back together easier. But anyway, you do that. And these are, I think they're just a grade 5. They're real tight with them. But see, you got it, because once you tighten these bolts down, it'll smash this thing in here, so this disc in, so you want that centered. Just kind of snug it up here in a star pattern. Now I'll just torque those to 15 foot-pounds is what a grade 5 5/16 bolt is, and they're pretty easy to put in. Clutch, and that's all centered, and you just pull that thing back out, and away you go. Dad was telling me yesterday Grandpa bought this clutch tool like back in the 60s or 50s or something. $4.29. That thing would probably be $100 now. But we put a lot of clutches in, but it still works good. And then just torque that up. Working on the manure spreader. Broke the chain, and then I got to work on the back. I got to change a couple bushings and put some bearings in where some bushings need to be, or put some bearings where bushings are. The thing I like about that little impact is you can snug stuff up, but it doesn't torque it too tight. Then you can still hit it with a torque wrench and it'll still move. Torquing it to 15 if they're a grade 8, which I'll clean the head off here and make sure they aren't, or make sure it's grade 5. Then you only torque them to like 18 foot-pounds. But that's how you install the clutch. Alrighty, we're ready to go. I'm gonna try her out. They're full of coolant, full of engine oil, new engine oil filter obviously, and I put new oil in the oil bath and cleaned all the dirt out of it. It was looking kind of nasty. And then on the clutch here to adjust it, I didn't have to adjust. This one is still good. At least when I adjust the clutch, I'm always looking for about 1 inch to 1.5 inches free travel with the pedal, and that makes sure the release bearing isn't always right. It isn't always spinning, because it starts spinning when you push the clutch in. But if you let it have some free travel, it won't be spinning. You won't be wearing it out. So obviously this one, if you needed more free travel, you just take that pin out and screw that turnbuckle in. But it's pretty good. And then there's all the way pressed in there. And then if you have too little free travel, it can also be putting pressure on the clutch, and it'll eventually slip then, or start slipping. And as the clutch wears out, you lose free travel, so it's good to check that free travel in the clutch from time to time. But we got the gas on.